Hello everyone, this is Kevin Van Mange, and this is Kev's TV series. What if events went differently? What if events happened when Yama Yugi would continue to attack Weevil? So I'm not going to continue with part 2 from Stranger Things because that's going to be a different video for when I would head back to What If again. But right now, this is just the next What Ifs until I get there. And that would be traced on Season 4. Of how I would get to Season 4. But for right now, it's time to discuss on what if Yama Yugi continued to attack Weevil. Yama Yugi was still using card by card by card by card after card after card after card and after card. And Taya watched in horror as Yama Yugi was continuing to hammer at Weevil over and over and over again. And as when he finally reached to a spell or trap card, the duel was over. Yama Yugi won. And he placed his spell or trap card back into his deck. And stopped what he was doing. His onslaught was so horrible, and Yama Yugi saw the aftermath of what he did. He couldn't believe what he did. But he was still under the effects of what happened with him under the power of the Orichalcos. Because of Weevil reminded him of what he did to his other half. Because of that, before Weevil lost the duel, Yama Yugi remembered that and couldn't believe he did that. So as Weevil was just standing there, instead of continuing to attack Weevil, Yama Yugi reached out and holded him and gave him to Taya. Because if Yama Yugi holded Weevil, he would still be reminded for what he did. Taya agreed to hold Weevil even though she never wanted to. And as the train, the vacant train, was going to the same place where Tristan and Joey would end up, they met with Seto Kaiba And Seto Kaiba used his plane in the normal timeline to bring Rex and Weevil to the infirmary. So everything remained in the same timeline as it does. And Yama Yugi would always remember what he did to Bald Weevil. The pressure got to him. And so now it's time to backtrack, fast forwarding to the point in time where Yama Yugi would give himself to the Orichalcos and cleanse him from all his insecurities of what his insecurities were, to help the great Leviathan come back from imprisonment. So how would this impact the other seasons of Yu-Gi-Oh! Should Yama Yugi have accepted being under the Orichalcos? Well, let's find out what would happen. As Dark starts hypnotizing Yama Yugi to be under the influence of the Orichalcos, he remembered everything that would prevent him from reaching his pentacle that would ended up being subjected to the Orichalcos. But as in those memories, one memory got to him that he will always remember: attacking Bald Weevil, accepting the fact of what he did. And he was like, what if Darts was right? After what I did to Bald Weevil, I could never forgive myself. And because of having those things in his head, the puzzle was big time inactive and couldn't save him in time. And as of what he was supposed to have been, I would have saved him, the Orichalcos cleansed Yama Yugi from what had happened to him. So in the normal timeline, Yama Yugi was to have been saved by the Millennium Puzzle because of what Yama Yugi was from before, a pharaoh that once saved Egypt. but with a continuation of his doubts of what he really is, and what his doing was from before after losing to Raphael, the Orichalcos was able to reach into Yama Yugi and Yama Yugi fell. Darts was finally happy that Yama Yugi gave in to the Orichalcos. And as he was, the Leviathan had all the power he needed. It needed to return. And as the Leviathan finally came back with the huge power of the Pharaoh, of Yama Yugi gives to the Leviathan, he was unable to save everyone. So Yama Yugi wasn't able to break the chains of the dragons either. Of what they once were, of when they were human. So they never got the chance to become human again. So the Leviathan was able to come out and bring devastation to the world. Everyone gave into the power of the Orichalcos, and let the world be destroyed. Now, how will this impact the next seasons? Well, let's find out. When I touch on that, when I do. And this is going to be it of what if Yama Yugi continued to attack Ball Weevil. And in the next episode, I'm going to touch on what if Ash Ketchum joined Team Skull. And then after that what if, it would be what if Ash Ketchum returned home from Power World. Imagine what that would be like. And those two what ifs in Ash Ketchum. After spending time in those, I would then talk on what if Jason survived the earthquake in Stranger Things Season 4? And then I'm going to touch on that nobody has ever considered to do. What if Harry, Ron, and Hermione were separated, sorted into different houses? Harry and Slytherin, Hermione and Ravenclaw, and Ron remains in Gryffindor. Because I only get in the fact that Ron would always be a Gryffindor because all Weasleys would always be a Gryffindor. If Arthur and Molly would have been in a different house, if it would have been them in Hufflepuff, what if Arthur and Molly were in Hufflepuff and not in Gryffindor? That way Ron would have been a Hufflepuff and not a Gryffindor. But would Arthur and Molly be Hufflepuff to begin with if they weren't sorted into Gryffindor? Answer: they were in Gryffindor to begin with, and so the kids would definitely follow. That's why they would be in Gryffindor than Ron actually being in Hufflepuff. Maybe I could touch on that if Ron could be a Hufflepuff. Because Weasleys are Weasleys, and they must remain in the same house just like their parents. If Arthur and Molly were in a different house, maybe I could touch on that so that Ron would actually be on the Hufflepuff side and not on the Gryffindor side. And that would be that what if Ron was a Hufflepuff, but with another what if situation of the same thing again. But this time it's not on Ron and Gryffindor, but this time it would be in Ron and Hufflepuff, Hermione and Ravenclaw, and Harry and Slytherin. That means all other Weasleys would definitely be in Hufflepuff and not Gryffindor. But I'll touch on that when I do, when in the fact that Arthur and Molly were Hufflepuffs. So this would be like, what if the Weasleys were Hufflepuffs and not Gryffindors? And this will be it for this video, and of what's to come for other what ifs to come, and when they would come, of when they would come, for other what ifs of what I would touch on. So now, since you understand my other what ifs of what I'm going to talk about later. Hello everyone, this is Kevin Mange, and this is Kev's TV series. Now, if you're wondering if I'm going to do of what I'm doing with my mouth, nope. I'm not doing anything to my mouth. Because last time, when you heard all of that, I was stuck in the what ifs. When I was at the time. But would they come again? That would be the big question of where I'm at still. But of where I'm at still. What if events went differently? What if events changed in what if Yama Yugi attacked Ball Weevil over and over and over again. I know I covered this in part 1 when I did, but this is part 2. Just like last video. What if Elle was alive? In my Stranger Things footing, Kevin manages footing, but in this topic, it's not that. This is still on the same topic from the last time I did the what ifs. What if Yama Yugi attacked Ball Weevil over and over and over again? Now, since you understand part 1, here's part 2. And to catch up where I last left off from part 1, Yama Yugi was now entering the resurrection of the Leviathan. So as Darts saw that Yama Yugi gave himself up to the Leviathan, Darts said this: finally, the Pharaoh has given himself up to power the Leviathan. And now it's up to the Leviathan to take the Pharaoh and everyone else. They'll be fed to the Leviathan. I'll use the power of the Oikalkos to speed up the process. Then Darts uses the power of the Oikalkos to speak to the Leviathan. Leviathan, the Pharaoh has given himself up to you. Now, would you do me a favor and speed up the process so that the Pharaoh will be able for you to feed? And so, the Leviathan does. It sped up the process of feeding on everyone's souls. And of where we're at right now is the Leviathan is now feeding on everyone. Joey, Maximilian Pegasus, Seto, and now the newcomer, Yama Yugi. And Joey asks, "Hey, why are we speeding up, Maximilian? It seems that the Leviathan has captured the Pharaoh." Or in other words, I'm afraid your friend, the Pharaoh himself, Yama Yugi, Oh no, not my friend. Joey said. And as everything sped up, Maximilian was fed to the Leviathan, Seto was fed to the Leviathan, and Joey was fed to the Leviathan. And the knights remained in cards. Now, if you're wondering what I'm talking about, the knights, these are Yu-Gi-Oh cards for your information, and these Yu-Gi-Oh cards had an inclination with the war that happened once before. And with them sealed, still sealed, the only hope they have left was to revive themselves and take on the fight against the Leviathan that they did before to prevent a war. With also a team up with the Egyptian gods, Slifer the Sky Dragon, the Ring Dragon of Ra, and Obelisk the Tormentor. And as everyone sped up, for the Leviathan to take everyone, Yama Yugi was the last to enter the Leviathan. And now the Leviathan has the power he needs to come back to life. And as it did, the knights plus the Egyptian gods teamed up to take on the Leviathan. And as they were doing so, the spirits of other Yu-Gi-Oh cards also was involved. Even the Dark Magician Girl as well. Even though the Dark Magician Girl may have been used by Yama Yugi, the Dark Magician Girl can forgive Yama Yugi for what Yama Yugi was feeling. Even though he used the power of the Dark Magician Girl to continue to attack Ball Weevil, the Dark Magician Girl said to everyone to remember all the memories they had of those that, while they gave themselves up to the Leviathan, and to return to where they were. Yama Yugi heard every word, but remained in the darkness, and that fed on the Leviathan. Taking down the Egyptian gods and the knights. It's hard to explain the names of the knights, but I know one of them was called Timaeus. But anywho, oh wait, and there's Hermos. But still, anywho, this all happened in the sky. And the knights as dragons, because believe it or not, for all of your information, the dragons used to have been human. So that's what I mean. So the dragons showed up as, by their name, Timaeus and Hermos. Yeah, I forgot the third, but that'll come into my head if I do. But you get my point. As these dragons showed up by their own name, they fought until the Leviathan killed the three dragons, Hermos, Timaeus, and the other one that I kind of forgot. However, the Egyptian gods don't take this fully. The Egyptian gods are trying to take down the Leviathan, but also in the process, in the end, Slapper the Sky Dragon was also the next dragon to be defeated. But to the Leviathan was able to succeed in defeating Obelisk the Tormentor. And during this time, those that were captured by the souls returned, except for Little Yugi, because Little Yugi is the reincarnation of Yama Yugi. And as his darkness grows, Little Yugi remained as well. So not every soul got out. Every soul except Little Yugi and Yama Yugi. That the Leviathan would use to defeat his foes. So like I said, the Leviathan was able to take down and beat and kill Obelisk the Tormentor. And as the Battle of the Dragons happened with Slifer the Sky Dragon and the Leviathan was able to beat Slifer. But for Ra had enough and used its ultimate power to defeat the Leviathan. Because of why Obelisk was killed, Slifer was killed. Now it's up to the ringed dragon of Ra to defeat and kill the Leviathan, and in the process was able to. The ringed dragon of Ra finally defeated the Leviathan, thus bringing back the Pharaoh and little Yugi. However, when they came back, little Yugi may have came back, but to the Pharaoh, I'm afraid the Pharaoh may have came back, but also died. So this means this would definitely be a huge impact for next season. As the Pharaoh died, little Yugi only had the only Egyptian god left. Slifer was no more. Obelisk was no more. So now, little Yugi has to deal with just the ringed dragon of Ra. And little Yugi had the pressure of being the king of duels on his shoulders. And with the defeat of the Pharaoh, killed, dead, he had a funeral to those that he cared about. Ironheart and Chris showed up, along with Darts, now freed from the power of the Oikhalkos. Saw the truth of what did happen to the Pharaoh after the Pharaoh let the Leviathan. Darts never thought that the Leviathan, when the souls would be set free, all the souls wouldn't be killed, except for the Pharaoh. But as for Darts, he finally has a redemption to help bury the Pharaoh after what he did. As Darts finally came back to his senses, he, Ironheart, and Chris left with Atlantis, remembering what just happened. But as they moved on, now we're going to get into the next season. So as next season goes, the next season goes as it does normally, except without Yama Yugi around, little Yugi will have to up his game in the end. And he would live up to the reputation of what Yama Yugi had. The king of games. So everything is riding on little Yugi's expectations from Yama Yugi. So that means by next season, everything just plays as it does after the funeral of Yama Yugi. Then we have this tournament. Things start to go awry again. But not by the Leviathan, by someone else who's hijacking computer systems. And as he was figured out, that still happens with an epic duel with Little Yugi and the one that looked up to Little Yugi of how he became the king of games thanks to Yama Yugi. So he finally earned his title by helping the person he was facing in a duel. Well, just a Yu-Gi-Oh duel, like a card game duel per se. And he finally cut his ties with his family on what his family was known for. After the tournament ended, is where I'll leave off in the other season I'll be talking about next. But that'll be its own topic because I got other topics to discuss as well. And that'll be on Ash Ketchum for these what ifs. What if Ash joined Team Skull? Next video. And what if Ash traveled without Pikachu? And so that's it for this What If episode. And I'll see you all in part 3 to this when that'll come. But until then, I'll see you all later.